Welcome to our series on how state, county, municipal, and infrastructure leaders can better detect and respond to cyber threats by taking new approaches to security operations. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and joining us to talk today more specifically about ways to guard against the growing business of cybercrime are Brenden Smith, Chief Information Security Officer at FirstBank, and David Kruse, Director, Insurance Alliances at Tetra Defense, a subsidiary of Arctic Wolf. Gentlemen, welcome. And David, let me start with you. Give us a sense, if you would, for the contours of cybercrime within the larger cyber threat landscape, and what distinct methods organizations really need to be having in place now to reduce their exposure to cybercrime.
Yeah, absolutely. So my firm, Tetra Defense, we're a cybersecurity incident response firm. So we're constantly responding to the front lines of the attacks that are occurring. And what we're seeing is that even in this stage of 2022, ransomware is still the ruler of the roost. So if you're going to be a victim of cybercrime, there's a good chance it's going to be something like a ransomware attack. And that's going to be immediately felt, immediately impactful, and immediately painful in a lot of cases, unfortunately. Threat actors most often are compromising their companies via some external vulnerability that's able to be detected with some kind of commodity vulnerability scanner. So you can help reduce that exposure by using the same tools they use to detect you to find whatever external vulnerabilities you might have and get them patched before the threat actors are able to actually exploit them.
Well, Brenden, as the CISO of one of the largest privately held banks in the nation, I'm interested to hear what steps are you taking these days to reduce cybercrime risks?
Yeah, I think David's comments are really spot on. There's two things we've been focusing on that are related to that. The first is attack surface management. So like he said, we very much are concerned about the vulnerabilities in our environment. So we want to have continuous insight into where those are and how those might be impacting us. And so we've leaned heavily into that. And then we paired that with continuous red team testing. So 24/7, 365 days a year, if we can, we're doing red team assessments with an independent third party against our environment. So we always have that authentic attacker's perspective on what risks we're taking as an organization.
Well, David, back to you. Ransomware has been a fact of life now for quite some time, and yet, a lot of public sector organizations continue to struggle to keep up. Why do you believe state and local organizations in the public sector really still need to better understand and analyze cybercrime tactics, things like methodology and demographics and so forth? And what should they be focusing on to develop a more effective cybersecurity approach?
Yeah, fabulous question. So all of these types of organizations, state and local governments, educational institutions, critical infrastructure, they are the underpinnings that make our society function. So it's incumbent upon themselves to do what they can with what they have where they are. So one strategy that can be impactful for them is if we go back to this idea that monitoring external exposure is going to make a measurable difference in reducing your risk to a ransomware attack or other types of cybercrime, one effective tool that they can use in the face of maybe limited budgets and constraints is to leverage whoever their cyber insurance carrier might be. More often than not, insurance carriers are starting to package external vulnerability scans along with the underwriting process. So even if you don't have access to some sort of external exposure scanning tool, the application process for cyber insurance might identify what are critical vulnerabilities that carrier knows are common points of weakness that lead to claims later on. So it's a way to leverage a resource that maybe you don't necessarily have a budget for, but you can still benefit from.
And then, Brenden, I'm curious, as a CISO, what specific tactics are you actually trying to use at FirstBank to protect against some of these cybercrime threats?
Yeah, there's two things we've been focusing our energy on. And the first is a really MITRE attacks framework. And so we're using that to try and understand and better analyze, right, the threats that are coming in from real world. So when we see attacks in the news or other things, we're comparing what's happening in those attacks against what's happening in our particular environment. So from there, what we do is we take that information and we're using deception systems to inform our ability to detect these bad guys. So a quick and easy example of that would be ransomware, right? So we know that some ransomware threat actors, when they breach the environment, they're looking for those insurance documents because they want to tailor their extortion demand to the potential insurance payout, right? And so what we've done is we create deception documents that look like insurance documents. The minute an attacker touches those, my team gets a high fidelity alert that says, hey, someone has just touched something in the environment that nobody else should be looking at. And so we use those types of things to understand attacker methodology and then tailor deception systems to improve our chances to catch these guys.
I love that, Brenden.
That's very clever. I love that. Well, David, I know you kind of alluded a little earlier to, cyber insurance. I'd like to follow up on that. What kind of risk management controls are taking shape with those kinds of insurance policies? And can you talk a little bit more about the role that cyber insurance plays and how the cyber insurance marketplace is evolving against growing cyber crimes?
Yeah, definitely. So the insurance industry has moved pretty substantially over the past, say, 5 to 10 years. 10 years ago, this policy was really geared at things like big data breaches and large losses of PII and PHI, things like that. It's moved much more into first-party losses, like ransomware attacks, like business interruption losses, and it's providing a framework of support that organizations are going to need to respond to those attacks. So things like providing digital forensics and incident response resources, legal counsel, crisis public relations, notification services, so on and so forth. It's evolved to support that type of response effort. Qualifying for that product has become substantially more difficult over the years. When I was a broker myself years back, 2017, 2018, you could apply for insurance, answer less than 5 questions in some cases, and get millions of dollars of coverage. Those days are long, long gone. These days, the best way that an organization can prepare themselves for the rigors of underwriting are really twofold. One, take something basic like the CIS controls and make meaningful gains in every one of those controls. Now, some are going to be more relevant based on the type of organization you've got, but have a story to tell regarding every one of those controls. Now, that's big picture. If we want to narrow it in, there are a few hot button issues that insurers are paying a lot of attention to these days. Basically, it's almost impossible to get insurance without having multi-factor authentication on your backups, your remote access, your cloud systems, email, things like that. If you don't have that, you're going to have a tough time. We're starting to see things like EDR tooling become table stakes for getting a cyber insurance policy. So to know what's coming down the pike in those areas, I really can't recommend enough working with a cyber insurance broker who really understands that market and can give you some heads up, maybe 4, 6, 8 months in advance. Hey, your renewal might not be till next April, but here's the scuttlebutt we're hearing now. You might want to start preparing for that in advance of your upcoming renewal.
And Brenden, back to you. We're hearing that it's getting either a little harder or more expensive to obtain cyber insurance, and the process of renewing cyber insurance is getting a little more arduous as well. What are you experiencing at FirstBank?
Yeah, our experience is very much in line with that. 5 years ago, it was a 5-minute effort for us, and it didn't take much thought at all to obtain insurance. Today, this year even, it's been 2 weeks of solid effort answering questions, dealing with questionnaires. They do assessments of your external environment, all sorts of different hoops that we have to jump through that we've never had to do before. In particular, we had a conversation with our broker. Like David says, they're a great ally for what you're trying to accomplish in obtaining insurance. But basically, they were saying if you didn't have jump boxes to get your high-risk server environment, and those jump boxes weren't configured with multi-factor authentication, flat out, you weren't going to get coverage that year. And so I asked them well, that's sort of a new requirement. When did that change? And they said, oh, that changed about 3 weeks ago. And so if we're not having those continuous conversations with our brokers, this is going to be just a larger and larger challenge. So it's becoming a huge focus for us.
And Brenden, to show you how that industry has shifted, when I was a broker 5 years ago, no underwriter would have known what a jump box was. so we've not only moved from, hey, how do I spell jump box to, hey, you need it and you need it protected. That's the shift that industry has experienced over the past 5 years or so.
That's an interesting anecdote. David, just as we kind of look ahead then, what best practices will public sector organizations likely need to have in place to obtain and renew their cyber insurance?
Yeah. So when we look at how it's going to be difficult for them over the coming years, if they're not doing some kind of external scanning, and I keep going back to that because it really is one of the hot button issues. If they're not staying on top of that and identifying potential weak points before the underwriting team that's going to increase the friction throughout the underwriting process. If they don't have a story to tell related to vulnerability management, multi-factor authentication, EDR tooling, and backups, if they don't have a strong story to tell in those 4 areas, they're going to have a hard time getting coverage. But if they can focus on those 4 and work with a broker who can tell you what the 5th one is going to be, what the 6th one, they're going to put themselves in the best position to actually qualify for coverage, and qualify for coverage that they're actually excited about.
And as you look ahead, Brenden, what other risk management concerns should executives like you and your organization and others like it pay attention to when developing their broader security strategies?
The thing I think that is an opportunity for a lot of organizations is to expand on the traditional concept of a tabletop exercise. And so most of us have probably done those exercises at some point in our career and for our organizations. But I think there's an increasing opportunity to associate those with financial risk modeling. And so being a bank, that's something we're very comfortable with, but a lot of other industries haven't done that. So if you go through a tabletop exercise and you start to include your senior leadership and your board of directors and others, and then you go through and you model the financial impact to your organization from that event, suddenly ransomware and other things become a lot more tangible to your key stakeholders. And they can understand this is going to cost us this much money, it's going to cost us this much customer generation down the road, and these other types of things, and it puts a real dollar amount associated with that. So I'd encourage a lot of organizations to rethink their approach to tabletops and start to include that financial assessment of the outcome of that tabletop exercise to sort of bring teeth to the exercise in general and the training experience.
And David, as we close, what else would you recommend public sector officials really pay attention to in managing their overall IT risks?
Sure. I think as we look forward from where we're at right now, ransomware is like I said, it is the thing that's ruling the roost right now. Cybercrime actors for years have shifted tactics as things have become more and more difficult. So right now we're in a phase where many organizations, because of the cyber insurance process, have something like multi-factor authentication in place, which does materially make ransomware more difficult for threat actors. So as ransomware becomes more difficult for them to execute, they need to increase their vigilance in areas like preventing social engineering attacks and continuing to train their employees, because it wouldn't surprise me for threat actors to shift from maybe a ransomware model to a pure data exfiltration, or really emphasize business email compromise attacks, because they just want to get paid. They don't particularly care how they get paid in a lot of cases. So if one type of attack is harder to monetize, they're going to find a different attack to monetize.
Absolutely. Well, Brenden Smith and David Kruse, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your respective insights on the evolving world of cybercrime and ways to address it.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Thank you.